The sun-baked canyon was silent, except for the shallow breathing of the wounded Apache warrior. Blood darkened his buckskins as he crawled toward the small cabin nestled against the rocky hillside. Inside, Maria worked alone, unaware of the fierce eyes watching her through the window. Her mother had warned her about the Apache, devils who showed no mercy, yet when she found him collapsed by their well, something in his pain-filled gaze spoke to her. Not savagery, but a wounded spirit that mirrored her own loneliness since father's murder. With strength belying her slender frame, she dragged him inside. Could a woman known for healing hands mend not just his wounds, but the hatred between their worlds? Will the warrior who's never known mercy learn to give his heart to the one who showed him compassion? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Maria Vasquez wiped flour-dusted hands on her worn apron and reached for the faded photograph on the mantel. Her father's smile, frozen in time, stared back at her, his arm around her mother, who hadn't smiled since the day they buried him. 3 years had passed since the outlaws came. 3 years of silence, filling their small cabin like another presence. "He would have been 55 today," she whispered, tracing the edge of the daguerreotype with her fingertip. The glass had cracked during their hasty move to this remote valley, another reminder of what couldn't be mended. Outside, wind rustled through her garden of healing herbs. Yarrow for wounds, echinacea for fever, valerian for sleep that wouldn't come naturally. The garden had been her salvation, the plants responding to her touch when people feared it. "The widow's daughter has the gift," they'd whisper in town, bringing their ailments but keeping their distance. Maria replaced the photograph and returned to kneading bread dough with more force than necessary. Her mother would return from visiting the Hansons' farm by sundown, bringing more whispers of Apache sightings and warnings to bar the doors. "Devils, all of them," her mother had declared last evening. "They killed the Wilsons last spring, took their scalps." She'd crossed herself, eyes darting toward the window. "We're too far out here, Maria. If they come—" "They haven't bothered us yet," Maria had answered softly. "And the valley needs my herbs," the truth she couldn't share. Alone in this cabin, Maria felt something close to peace. In town, with its sideways glances and hushed conversations that stopped when she approached, she felt the weight of their fear, not of Apaches, but of her. Of hands that could heal when the doctor failed, of knowledge passed from her Mexican grandmother that seemed too close to witchcraft for the settlers' comfort. She punched the dough down and shaped it into a loaf. The shelves held jars of dried herbs, tinctures, and salves, her modest living. Last week, she'd helped birth the Cartwrights' twin boys when no one thought the mother would survive. The payment had been a side of bacon and a promise to speak well of her in town. The windows were growing dark, and Maria lit the oil lamp, its soft glow pushing back the shadows. Her mother would not return tonight. She often stayed over when visits ran late rather than risk the trail after dark. Another night alone. Maria glanced again at the photograph. "I'm not afraid, Papa," she said aloud, though the words rang hollow. Not afraid of Apaches or outlaws, perhaps, but the loneliness had teeth. At dawn, she would collect fresh yarrow from the hidden meadow beyond the ridge, a spot only she knew about. These thoughts carried her through her evening routine, checking the bread, securing the doors, laying out herbs to dry. Normal tasks that created an illusion of normalcy. From the small box beneath her bed, she withdrew her journal and recorded the day's activities in careful script. Her father had insisted she learn letters, even when the other Mexican families saw no use for a girl's education. "Words are another kind of medicine," he told her. "They keep memories from fading." Tonight she wrote of the stillness, of watching dust clouds in the distance that suggested riders, Apache, settlers, or worse, and of the strange feeling that something approached that would change everything. She was 26 and had lived more years without prospects than most unmarried women in the territory. There had been Thomas, the shopkeeper's son, before the tragedy. His earnest proposals abandoned when Maria turned inward, spending more time with her grandmother's remedies than with him. "You're not the same girl," he'd said finally. "I don't recognize you anymore." He was right. The Maria who laughed easily had died alongside her father. As darkness claimed the valley, she closed the journal and moved to the window. Stars punctured the black canvas of night, indifferent to the boundaries men drew in blood on the land below. Sometimes she wondered if her grandmother had been right, that spirits lingered between those points of light, watching and waiting. A sound outside drew her attention, not her mother's wagon, but something softer, a footfall perhaps, or an animal seeking water at the well. Maria reached for the rifle above the door, her hand steady despite her racing heart. Whatever waited in the darkness, she would face it standing. The faded photograph watched from the mantel, her father's frozen smile a reminder that everything cherished could be lost in a single moment of violence. And yet, she opened the door anyway. Takoda touched the eagle feathers of his war bonnet, carefully secured in a deerskin pouch at his side. Even now, with death circling like a buzzard overhead, he would not leave it behind. 5 generations of chiefs had worn these feathers, each earned in battle, each carrying the weight of his people's survival. Blood seeped through his fingers where he pressed them against the bullet wound in his side. The outlaws had ambushed his small party in the narrow canyon, 6 men with repeating rifles against his band of 4 warriors, cowards, waiting until his men had entered the narrowest passage before opening fire from above. "Find the chief!" one had shouted in English, not knowing Takoda understood their tongue. "Wolcott wants the Alpha dead." Alpha. The name the settlers had given him after he'd led the raid that recovered stolen children from a band of renegade trappers. They feared him now, this Alpha Apache they spoke of around campfires. If they knew how his people struggled to feed themselves after being pushed from their ancestral hunting grounds, perhaps they would see him differently. His 3 companions were surely dead. He had seen 2 hawks fall first, then Bearkiller. Young Wolf had called out a warning before bullets silenced him forever. Only Takoda had managed to slip away through a hidden crevice, though not before a bullet found his flesh and a knife. Blade sliced across his ribs during the brief hand-to-hand combat. The sky tilted strangely as he crawled forward. How long had he been moving? Hours. The sun had crossed half the sky since the ambush. Too much blood lost. Too little water. But a warrior of the people did not die face down in the dirt like a wounded animal. He would find shelter, die upright if die he must. His vision narrowed to the path before him, following a game trail that led toward water. He could smell it, the dampness in the air that promised relief. One more rise, one more painful drag of his body across rock and scrub brush. And there it was, a small cabin with smoke rising from its chimney, settler land. Death waited there too, but perhaps a cleaner one than bleeding out alone. His people would search for him when he didn't return. They would find the bodies of his warriors, but not his own. Without proof of his death, they would not select a new chief, would not properly mourn him. This thought pained him more than his wounds, to leave his people in uncertainty. He pulled himself to the cover of a juniper tree and observed the cabin. A single figure moved inside. A woman, it seemed, working alone. No men visible, no horses in the small corral. Just the woman, her movements calm and purposeful through the window. Mexican, perhaps, from her dark hair and the colorful cloth hanging near the door. The Mexicans were not always enemies like the White Eyes. Some remembered older ways, respected the land and those who had lived on it first. Takoda's vision blurred again, the cabin swimming before him. He closed his eyes, his hand tightening around the pouch containing his war bonnet. If this was to be his final day, he would meet the Great Spirit wearing the symbols of his rank and honor. He had not always been a war chief. Once, before the White Eyes came in greater numbers, he had been known for his skills as a healer and his voice in council. Now he was known only for how fiercely he fought, how many enemies had fallen to his knife. The thought brought no pride, only weariness. The woman appeared in the doorway of the cabin, silhouetted against the interior light. She carried something, a basket, and moved toward a small garden plot beside the structure. Even through his pain, Takoda could appreciate the grace in her movements, the careful way she knelt to tend the plants. A healer, perhaps, like he had once been. His strength was fading quickly now. Soon, the choice to approach or remain hidden would be made for him by death itself. With a final surge of will, Takoda pulled himself toward the cabin's well, water first, then whatever fate the woman might bring. He had almost reached the stone rim when darkness claimed him. As consciousness slipped away, his fingers loosened. Around the pouch, the eagle feathers inside representing everything he had been, everything he had fought to preserve. His last thought was not of battle or glory, but of his mother's voice from long ago. A chief's greatest strength is not in his arm, but in his heart. The Alpha Apache fell still, the dust settling around him like a shroud. Maria's fingers touched the silver crucifix at her throat, her mother's most treasured possession, grudgingly left behind during her visit to the Hansons. "Forgive me, Mother," she whispered, knowing Elena Vasquez would never understand what she was about to do. The Apache warrior lay sprawled beside the well, blood darkening the hard-packed earth beneath him. For a moment, Maria stood frozen in the doorway, her mother's warnings echoing in her mind. Devils who take pleasure in suffering. They killed the Wilsons. They would kill us without thought. But the man before her wasn't poised to kill anyone. His breathing came in shallow gasps, his copper skin ashen beneath the sunset's glow. Beside his outstretched hand lay a small deerskin pouch, something precious he had refused to release even as consciousness left him. Maria approached cautiously, rifle ready. "Señor?" she called softly, though she knew he couldn't answer. Up close, she could see the bullet wound in his side, the knife gash across his ribs. Without treatment, he would be dead before morning, if he lasted that long. The healer in her assessed his chances coolly. Poor, but not impossible. The crucifix felt heavy against her skin as she made her decision. Setting the rifle aside, she grasped the warrior under his arms and began to drag him toward the cabin. His weight nearly overwhelmed her, but stubbornness had always been her sin, according to her mother. Inside, she cleared her work table with one sweep of her arm, sending herbs and tools clattering to the floor. With monumental effort, she heaved the Apache onto the table and immediately pressed a clean cloth against the worst of his wounds. "Don't die yet," she muttered, reaching for her healing supplies. "I haven't decided if saving you is worth my mother's fury." Working quickly, she cut away his buckskin shirt, revealing the full extent of the damage. The bullet remained lodged near his shoulder, and the knife wound would need stitching. Fever already burned through him, his skin hot beneath her palm. As she cleaned the wounds with yarrow tincture, his eyes suddenly flew open, dark, intense eyes that fixed on her with startling clarity. His hand shot out, gripping her wrist with surprising strength. "Agua," he rasped in Spanish. Maria nodded, gently extracting her wrist. "Yes, water. But first, the bullet." She showed him her tools, a small knife, long tweezers, needle and thread, speaking in simple Spanish. "This will hurt." The warrior gave a short nod and released her, his gaze never leaving her face. He didn't flinch when she dug for the bullet, didn't cry out when she stitched the gaping knife wound. Only the tightening around his eyes and the sheen of sweat on his brow betrayed his pain. As she worked, night fell completely. The lamp's glow cast their shadows large against the cabin walls. The wounded warrior, the healer, bent over him. An impossible tableau that would horrify everyone she knew. "My mother will return tomorrow," Maria said, though she wasn't sure he understood. "If she finds you here," she didn't finish the thought. Instead, she helped him drink water mixed with willow bark for the pain and fever. Why? He asked suddenly in accented but clear English, surprising her. Maria touched the crucifix again, seeking guidance. Because you needed help, she answered finally. And I know how to give it. A sound outside made her heart race. A wagon. Now just the wind. Relief flooded her, followed immediately by shame. Since when did she fear her own mother's return? The warrior's eyes were closing again, the brief surge of strength fading. Takoda, he murmured before slipping back into unconsciousness. Takoda, she repeated, testing the name on her tongue. A name made him a man, not just an Apache. A man who would die without further care. Maria worked through the night, alternately bathing his fever-hot skin with cool cloths and dripping herbal teas between his lips. Dawn found her exhausted, slumped in a chair beside the table where he lay. The sound of a wagon approaching jerked her awake. Through the window, she saw her mother's familiar figure on the seat, returning earlier than expected. Maria's hand went to the crucifix. Her mother would enter, would see the Apache warrior, would understand that her daughter had chosen to help the enemy. Maria, her mother called from outside. Come help with these packages. She rose on unsteady legs, glancing at Takoda's still form. In saving his life, she had just upended her own. The crucifix felt like lead against her skin, the weight of betrayal, of choosing compassion over caution, of defying everything she had been taught to fear. I'm coming, Mother, she answered, and opened the door to face the consequences of her choice. The wooden mortar and pestle moved in a steady rhythm as Maria ground yarrow leaves into a fine paste. 3 days had passed since her mother's ultimatum, 3 days of silence in the cabin, broken only by the grinding of herbs, the crackling of the fire, and the occasional labored breath from the man on her bed. Him or me, Elena had declared, face contorted with fury and fear upon seeing the Apache warrior. I will not sleep under the same roof as a savage who would slit our throats given half a chance. Maria had stood her ground, something she had never done before. He will die without care, then let him die elsewhere. Her mother had grabbed her shawl, hands shaking. When the Wilsons were found, their baby's head was crushed against a rock. Their daughter was... She'd stopped, crossing herself. He's wounded and alone, Maria had answered softly. Like Papa was. The blow had landed as intended. Elena's face had gone pale. You choose him over your own mother, over your father's memory. I choose what Papa would have done. Her mother had left without another word, taking the wagon to the Hansons' farm, where she had been staying ever since. Each day Maria expected her return, or worse, men from town coming to remove the savage by force. The grinding paused as Maria glanced at Takoda. He lay still, but she knew he was awake, watching her through half-closed eyes. His fever had broken yesterday, a good sign. The bullet wound was clean, the knife gash healing without infection. He would live, barring complications. She approached with a fresh poultice, gesturing to his bandages. He nodded once, eyes now fully open and following her movements. As she removed the old dressing, his hand suddenly covered hers, not to stop her but in acknowledgement. A brief touch, warm and deliberate, before he returned his arm to his side. Thank you, he said, the words still accented but clear. Maria nodded, continuing her work in silence. She had noticed how he conserved his words, speaking only when necessary. At first, she'd thought perhaps his English was limited, but increasingly she suspected this quietness was his natural way. As she pressed the fresh poultice to his wound, he inhaled sharply, but made no sound. His stoicism impressed her. She had treated settlers who howled over lesser injuries. Your mother, he said suddenly, she will not return while I am here. It wasn't a question, but Maria answered anyway. No, I have brought trouble to your house. Maria secured the bandage before responding. Trouble was already here. She moved to the window, looking out at the empty trail. My mother has been afraid since my father was killed. She sees danger in every shadow. There is danger, Takoda said simply. Maria turned to face him. From you? For the first time, something like a smile touched his lips. Not from me, She returned to her work table, taking up the mortar and pestle again. The familiar motion soothed her, the earthy scent of the herbs grounding her in the present moment. "You understand more English than you first showed," she observed. Dakota shifted slightly on the bed, testing his strength. "I traded with settlers before the troubles began. Learned their words, their ways, and they call you Alpha Apache," Maria said, remembering the whispers in town. "The fierce one who leads raids against the settlements." His expression remained unchanged, but something flickered in his dark eyes. "They say many things. Not all are true." A knock at the door froze them both. Maria set down the mortar and moved quickly to the rifle propped by the door. "Who's there?" she called, voice steadier than she felt. "Just me, Miss Maria," came Bobby Hanson's young voice. "Ma sent some fresh bread and milk, seeing as you're alone and all." Maria exhaled slowly, glancing at Dakota, who had already pulled the blanket higher to conceal his presence. She cracked the door just wide enough to accept the basket from the 12-year-old boy. "Thank your mother for me, Bobby." The boy peered past her curiously. "Ma says your own mother's awful upset. Says you two had a disagreement." "That's between me and my mother," Maria replied gently. "Now run along before it gets dark." After the boy left, she leaned against the closed door. "The valley has ears," she murmured, more to herself than to Dakota. "And eyes," he added. "The boy saw the extra cup on your table." Maria looked where he indicated. Indeed, 2 cups sat by the wash basin where she'd left them after breakfast. A careless mistake that could lead to dangerous speculation. Dakota attempted to sit up, grimacing with the effort. "I should leave. You'd make it perhaps 50 paces before collapsing," Maria countered, moving to help him lie back down. "Then all of this would be for nothing." Their eyes met, and in that moment something passed between them, an understanding deeper than words. They were bound now, both outcasts in their own way, both defying expectations. The wooden mortar sat abandoned on the table, the healing paste half-finished, like everything else in this strange, suspended moment of their lives. The clay water jar stood on the table between them, its earthen surface cool despite the afternoon heat. Maria had fashioned it herself last autumn, her fingers working the clay while her mind wandered to distant places, places where her father still lived, where her laugh came easily, where strangers didn't whisper witch when she passed. "Your fever has broken completely," she told Dakota, pouring water from the jar into his cup. A week had passed since he'd first opened his eyes in her cabin. Each day brought visible improvement, his strength returning like spring after a harsh winter. He sat now at her table, no longer confined to the bed. The simple act seemed momentous, a wounded predator becoming something else entirely in the quiet of her home. "This is your work?" He gestured to the jar, his fingers tracing the simple pattern she'd etched around its middle. Maria nodded. "My grandmother taught me. She said women should create things that hold life, jars for water, baskets for food, cradles for children." "My mother made such jars," Dakota said, surprising her with this personal revelation. "She added the crushed shell of turtle for strength." "I use ground pottery shards from broken pieces," Maria replied, finding unexpected pleasure in this exchange of craft knowledge. "My grandmother said it gives the new vessel the wisdom of the old." Dakota's lips curved slightly, not quite a smile, but the closest he'd come to one in her presence. "My people say similar things." The moment stretched between them, comfortable in a way that made Maria acutely aware of how uncomfortable she usually felt around others. With Dakota, silence wasn't something to be filled, but a space they shared without strain. "You were ambushed," she said finally, remembering his fevered mutterings during those first critical nights. His expression closed slightly, but he nodded. 6 men. They waited in the high canyon where the trail narrows. "White men?" "Yes, but not soldiers." His eyes met hers directly. "Men who have been attacking both your people and mine, burning homesteads, then blaming it on Apache raids." Maria's hand stilled on the water jar. "What do you mean?" 3 summers ago, a settlement in the North Valley was raided. Family killed. "The father?" He paused, studying her face. "They said Apache did this." The breath caught in Maria's throat. The Wilson family, it was not Apache, Dakota said firmly. My scouts found the tracks. White men wearing moccasins, riding shod horses. Maria sat heavily in the chair opposite him. There have been other attacks. Other families, including her own, though she couldn't bring herself to say it aloud. Men who want the land empty, Dakota confirmed. They drive settlers away with fear of Apache. They drive Apache away with soldiers. Then they take what's left. Why? This valley is beautiful but hardly rich. Silver in the northern hills. Water rights. The railroad coming. Dakota took a careful sip from his cup, his movements still measured to avoid pulling at his healing wounds. The one they call Wolcott leads them. Maria didn't recognize the name, but she had little contact with the wider territory's affairs. Her world had contracted to this cabin, her garden, and the occasional reluctant trip to town for supplies. You were coming to warn someone when they attacked you, she guessed. A shadow passed across his features. 3 of my warriors died in that canyon. Maria instinctively reached across the table, her hand covering his, in a gesture of comfort she would have considered unthinkable just days ago. I'm sorry. He looked down at their hands, his dark skin against her lighter brown. Instead of pulling away, he turned his palm upward, his fingers curling slightly around hers. I was not just a war chief before these troubles, he said quietly. I was a healer among my people. The revelation struck Maria with unexpected force. The fearsome alpha Apache of settler nightmares. A healer like herself. Show me, she said impulsively, reaching for a sprig of rosemary from the bundle hanging by the fireplace. She placed it before him. What would you use this for? His fingers brushed the aromatic needles. For memory. For clearing thoughts when they become clouded. And for wounds that fester beneath the skin, where they cannot be seen. My grandmother said the same, Maria whispered. They spent the afternoon exchanging knowledge, desert plants that stopped bleeding, roots that eased pain, barks that reduced fever. The water jar stood forgotten between them as they discovered a shared language more profound than English or Apache or Spanish. When Dakota finally stood, testing his strength by walking the short distance to the window and back, Maria felt an unfamiliar tightness in her chest, not fear, but something equally overwhelming. You'll leave soon, she said, the words slipping out before she could contain them. Dakota looked at her, his expression unreadable. Yes? The clay jar caught the last rays of sunlight through the window, its simple form casting a complex shadow across the table. Like everything in this unexpected interlude, Maria thought, simple on the surface. But beneath, currents ran deep and strong, reshaping the landscape of her heart without permission. The wanted poster lay on the table between them, its bold lettering stark against the weathered paper. $500 reward for the capture of the Alpha Apache, dead or alive. Beneath these words was a crude drawing that bore little resemblance to the man sitting across from Maria, yet the description, tall warrior with scar across right forearm, left no doubt about its intended target. Marshal Dawson brought it yesterday, Maria said, her voice low despite being alone with Dakota in the cabin. He's warning all outlying homesteads. Said there's been an Apache raid south of here. 3 settlers killed. Dakota studied the poster, his expression unchanged. 2 weeks had passed since he'd first collapsed by her well. His wounds had healed enough that he could move freely around the cabin, though the ride back to his people would still tax his strength. Not my warriors, he said finally. I believe you. Maria was surprised to realize she meant it. The fierce, silent man who had shared her home these past weeks was not the savage from her mother's warnings. He was complex, thoughtful, bound by a code of honor she was beginning to understand. The marshal asked questions, she continued, about why I've not been to town, about my mother staying with the Hansons. What did you tell him? That I've been unwell. That Mother and I had a disagreement. She managed a wry smile. Both true enough. Dakota nodded, but his eyes remained troubled. He suspects, perhaps. He asked if I'd seen any Apache in the area. Maria folded the poster carefully. I said no. The lie had come easily, surprising her. All her life she had been taught that lying was a sin, Yet protecting Dakota had felt right. Necessary. Your mother has not returned, Dakota observed, his gaze moving to the crucifix that still hung by the door. Untouched since Elena Vasquez had stormed out. No, Maria busied herself with the breakfast dishes. But she sends messages with Bobby Hansen, asking when it will be gone from her home. She couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. It, not he. Dakota rose from the table, moving to stand beside her at the wash basin. His presence at her shoulder sent an unexpected warmth through her. Your people fear what they do not understand, he said quietly. As do yours, she countered. Yes, he took a wet plate from her hands, drying it with careful movements. Fear makes us blind, makes us less than we could be. They worked in companionable silence until the small stack of dishes was clean. Outside, birds called to each other in the morning light, a peaceful sound at odds with the growing tension in the valley. I should leave tomorrow, Dakota said abruptly. My wounds have healed enough for travel. The words shouldn't have hurt, but they did. Maria kept her eyes on the basin. Your people will be searching for you. Yes, and your mother wishes to return home. He hesitated, then added, and the marshal's suspicions put you in danger. Maria turned to face him, suddenly aware of how close they stood. The wanted poster is the work of men like Wolcott, Dakota finished. They benefit from war between Apache and settler. A peaceful valley serves them nothing if they wish to claim the land. A sound outside froze them both, hoofbeats approaching at a canter. Maria moved quickly to the window. The marshal, she whispered, recognizing the distinctive grey mare. And he's not alone. Dakota was already moving, gathering the few possessions he had kept with him, the small deerskin pouch containing his war bonnet, a knife Maria had given him from her father's things. The root cellar, Maria said urgently. Through that door, quickly! He hesitated, looking at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. If they find evidence I was here. They won't, she said with more confidence than she felt. The approaching riders were nearly at the cabin now. With one fluid movement, Dakota grasped her hand, pressing something into her palm, a small carved stone bear. For protection, he said, then disappeared into the root cellar. Pulling the door closed behind him, Maria barely had time to hide the wanted poster under a stack of linens before a sharp knock rattled the cabin door. Miss Vasquez? Marshal Dawson's voice called. Need a word with you. She smoothed her apron, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, and opened the door with what she hoped was a convincing smile. Marshal, what brings you back so soon? The lawman's weathered face was grim beneath his hat. Behind him stood two men she recognized from town, the blacksmith and Mr. Peterson from the general store. All three wore sidearms. Got reports of Apache tracks near your property, the marshal said without preamble. Mind if we look around? The wanted poster seemed to burn through the linens where she'd hidden it, the reward amount large enough to tempt even honest men in hard times. $500 could buy a fresh start somewhere far from this troubled valley. Of course, Maria heard herself say, stepping aside to let them enter. I've seen nothing, but you're welcome to look. As the men filed past her, Maria's fingers closed around the stone bear in her pocket. For protection, Dakota had said. She would need it now. The silver pocket watch ticked softly in Maria's palm, its familiar weight both comforting and painful. Her father had carried it every day of his adult life, winding it each morning with the same careful attention he gave to everything. His land, his family, his principles. They didn't take it, she told Dakota, seated beside her on the porch steps in the gathering twilight. The marshal and his men had departed hours ago, their search revealing nothing suspicious. When they killed him, they left this in his pocket. My mother said it was because the engraving showed it was a gift, worthless to anyone else. Dakota gently took the watch, examining the worn inscription, to Manuel with eternal love. Elena. It still keeps perfect time, Maria continued, her voice steadier than she expected. Like some part of him is still here, still measuring out our days. The evening air was cooling rapidly, stars appearing in the indigo sky above them. After the tension of the marshal's visit, sitting outside felt like freedom. though Maria knew it was a risk. But the need to speak, to be heard, suddenly outweighed caution. "I was different before," she said softly. "Before they killed him." Dakota returned the watch to her hand, his fingers brushing hers in the exchange. "How are you different?" I laughed. "I danced at fiestas. I planned for a future with a man named Thomas, who worked in his father's store in town." A sad smile crossed her lips. "Thomas said I was like sunshine." She closed her fingers around the watch, feeling its steady rhythm against her skin. "After they found my father, after we buried him, the sunshine went away. Thomas waited 6 months, then told me he couldn't marry a woman who had turned inward like a cave." "He was weak," Dakota said, the judgment in his voice surprisingly comforting. "Perhaps. Or practical. He wanted children, laughter in his home." Maria shrugged. "My mother retreated into fear and bitterness. I retreated into my grandmother's healing ways." The valley began to whisper about the witch woman who could heal with herbs but never smiled. Dakota was silent for a long moment, his profile strong against the darkening sky. "My wife died in childbirth," he said finally. 7 winters ago. The revelation startled her. She had never considered his life before, a family, a home beyond the fearsome reputation that preceded him. "I am sorry," she said, the inadequate words all she had to offer. "I too changed. Became the warrior more than the healer, led raids to protect what remained of our hunting grounds as more settlers came." His voice held no apology, just a statement of fact. "Each path taken narrows the paths that remain open to us." Maria understood. Her choice to become the solitary healer, to embrace her grandmother's knowledge after her father's murder, had closed doors in the valley community. Just as Dakota's choice to become the fierce protector had cemented his people's expectations of him. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "The path you chose?" "No, my people needed the warrior." He turned to look at her directly. "Do you regret becoming the healer?" Maria considered the question, the pocket watch warm in her hand. "No, but I regret what was lost along the way." A coyote called in the distance, its lonely voice echoing across the valley. Another answered from closer to the cabin, the conversation continuing between unseen creatures in the gathering darkness. "Why did you tell me about your wife?" Maria asked after a while. "To show you that I understand loss," Dakota replied, "and how it shapes what follows." The simple honesty of his answer moved her. In the 2 weeks he had spent in her home, recovering from wounds that would have killed a lesser man, Dakota had shown her a dignity and depth that contradicted everything she had been taught about savages. He had also seen her, truly seen her, in a way no one had since her father's death. "Dakota," she said, testing his name in this new context of shared confidences. "What does your name mean?" "Friend to all," he answered, a hint of irony in his voice. "My mother had hopes for me. Despite everything, the danger still lurking in the marshal's suspicions, her mother's continued absence, the wanted poster hidden in the cabin." Maria felt laughter bubble up from some long dormant place inside her. Not the full, free laugh of the girl she had once been, but something genuine nonetheless. Dakota's expression softened at the sound. In the fading light, the fearsome Alpha Apache was just a man sitting beside her, carrying his own burdens of loss and duty. The pocket watch ticked on in her hand, marking a moment that felt strangely like a beginning rather than an ending. Tomorrow he would leave. They both knew it was necessary. But tonight, on this porch, with darkness cloaking them from prying eyes, they were simply 2 people, finding unexpected common ground in the wasteland of their separate griefs. The carved bone whistle lay in Dakota's palm, small yet intricately detailed with symbols Maria didn't recognize. In the early morning light filtering through the cabin windows, the yellowed bone seemed to glow with an inner warmth. "This was to be my last journey as a war chief," Dakota said, turning the whistle so she could see all its markings. "I was traveling to Fort Garland to speak with the new army commander." Maria looked up from the bundle of provisions she was preparing for his journey. "You were going to the fort, willingly?" Dakota nodded, his expression solemn. The old ways are dying, Maria. My people starve on reduced hunting grounds. Children sicken in camps where we cannot move with the seasons as we once did. He closed his fingers around the whistle. I was chosen to seek terms for peace. The revelation stunned her. The fearsome Alpha Apache, a peace emissary. My warriors accompanied me as protection only, he continued. We carried the white flag of truce. The ambush! His jaw tightened. They knew our purpose. They sought to prevent it. Walcott, Maria whispered, remembering the name from earlier conversations. Yes, his men wore army coats, but they were not soldiers. They sought to make it appear as if the army had betrayed our peace offering. Dakota's voice was controlled, but she could sense the rage beneath his words. Had they succeeded, my people would have launched a full war in retaliation. Maria sat heavily in the chair opposite him, her mind racing. The raids on settlements, the attacks blamed on Apache, all designed to prevent peace, Dakota confirmed. War benefits those who would claim these lands once both settlers and Apache are removed or weakened beyond resistance. The whistle in his hand suddenly took on new significance. And that? It calls my warriors, he explained. 3 short bursts can be heard for miles in the right conditions. It signals my location if we are separated. You haven't used it, Dakota met her gaze steadily. No, the unspoken truth hung between them. He could have summoned help days ago, once his strength began to return. Instead, he had stayed, healing in her cabin, sharing meals and conversations, revealing more of himself with each passing day. Why? She asked, though part of her already knew the answer. Dakota set the whistle on the table between them. At first because I was too weak, then because I needed to understand what was happening in the valley. And then, he paused, seeming to search for words in a language not his own. Because I found peace here that I had forgotten existed. Heat bloomed in Maria's cheeks. No man had spoken to her so directly since Thomas had ended their engagement 3 years ago. My people believe I am dead, Dakota continued. Soon they will select a new war chief, perhaps one who will not seek peace with the white eyes. Then you must return quickly, Maria said, pushing down the hollow feeling his imminent departure created. Tell them what you've learned about Walcott. Yes. Dakota rose and moved to the window, scanning the horizon with the habitual vigilance of a man long accustomed to danger. But there is more you should know, Maria. The men who ambushed my party, I believe they are the same who killed your father. The world seemed to still around her. How can you know this? The leader of the ambush, a man with a scar from eye to chin. Dakota turned to face her. You described such a man when you spoke of your father's killers. Maria's hand went instinctively to her father's pocket watch, carried in her apron pocket since their conversation the previous evening. Hector Mendez, she whispered. That was the name my mother heard. The one who got away when the posse tracked the killers. He works for Walcott now, Dakota said. He was among those who attacked us in the canyon. The implications washed over Maria like cold water. The murder of her father, the attacks blamed on Apache, the ambush of Dakota's peace party, all connected, all parts of a larger scheme to claim the valley. What will you do when you return to your people? She asked. Tell them what I have learned. Seek to continue the peace mission if they will listen. His expression softened slightly. And then perhaps return to this valley. The words hung in the air between them. Full of meaning neither dared to fully articulate. Maria stood, suddenly unable to remain still, with the emotions coursing through her. When will you leave? At nightfall, Dakota answered. Safer to travel in darkness. Hours then. Only hours left of this strange interlude that had changed something fundamental within her. Maria busied herself with the provisions again, adding another strip of dried venison to the bundle, her movements mechanical while her mind whirled. Maria. Dakota's voice drew her attention. He stood before her, the bone whistle once again in his hand. With a deliberate motion, he pressed it into her palm, closing her fingers around it. Keep this. If danger comes, use it. 3 short bursts, but your warriors will respond to your call as they would to mine, he finished. You have my word. The whistle was warm from his hand, the carved symbols pressing into her skin like a promise. In that moment, with his dark eyes holding hers, Maria understood that whatever lay ahead, nothing between them would end with his departure tonight. The old rifle had belonged to her father, its wooden stock smooth from years of handling. Manuel Vasquez had taught Maria to shoot when she was 12, insisting that a woman alone on the frontier needed to protect herself. Not just from wild animals, he'd said, his eyes serious beneath his weathered hat. From men who think a Mexican woman is easy prey. Maria checked the ammunition as twilight settled over the cabin. Dakota would be leaving soon, slipping away under cover of darkness to rejoin his people. He stood by the window, watching the road with the focused attention of a hawk. Something's wrong, he said suddenly, his body tensing. Riders coming fast. Maria joined him at the window. Through the gathering dusk, she could make out dust rising from the valley road, 4, maybe 5 horsemen approaching at a gallop. The marshal again? She suggested, though her instincts told her otherwise. Marshal Dawson was methodical, unhurried. These riders moved with urgency. Dakota shook his head. No, he squinted into the distance. One wears a red bandana. A chill ran through Maria. The scarred man, Mendez. He wore a red bandana when they killed my father. They exchanged a look of understanding. There was no coincidence here, only the collision of past and present. They must have learned I survived, Dakota said, moving away from the window with fluid efficiency. Someone in town recognized signs of an Apache staying here, or my mother told them, Maria added quietly. The thought hurt, but she couldn't dismiss it. Elena's fear of Apache ran bone deep. Dakota gathered his few possessions, face grim. I should leave. Draw them away from your home. No. Maria hefted the rifle, checking the sight with practiced hands. They killed my father. Now they've come to my home. The cold fury in her voice surprised even her. I will not run. For a moment, Dakota studied her, something like admiration flickering in his eyes. Then he nodded once. We have minutes, maybe less. They moved with urgent purpose, barricading the door with the heavy oak table, closing and securing shutters. Maria gathered extra ammunition, water, medical supplies, preparing for a siege she had rehearsed in nightmares since her father's murder. Stay away from the windows, Dakota instructed, accepting the knife she offered from her father's collection. If they don't know for certain I am here, they may leave you alone. They won't, Maria replied with grim certainty. Mendez saw me at my father's ranch. He knows who I am. The thundering hooves grew louder, then slowed to a walk as they approached the cabin. Maria's heart pounded against her ribs, but her hands remained steady on the rifle. Señorita Vasquez, a voice called out, rough, mocking. We know you're harboring an Apache dog in there. Send him out, and maybe we'll let you live. Dakota's expression darkened at the words. He positioned himself beside the front window, where he could see without being seen. 5 men, he murmured. Heavily armed. The one in front has a scar. Mendez, Maria confirmed, throat tight. Pretty lady, Mendez called again. Your mama told us everything. How you chose an Apache savage over your own blood. So it had been her mother after all. The betrayal stung, but Maria pushed the pain aside. There would be time for that later, if they survived. Come out now, Indian. Another voice, deeper. Wolcott pays extra for the Alpha Apache's head. Dakota met her eyes across the darkened room. Wolcott, he mouthed silently. Maria's mind raced. If Wolcott wanted Dakota dead so badly, it confirmed everything. The orchestrated attacks, the false flag operations, the effort to prevent peace. And now those same men had come to her doorstep. Last chance, lady. Mendez shouted, Send him out or we burn you both out. Maria moved to Dakota's side, keeping low. What do we do? She whispered. He examined the bone whistle she still wore on a cord around her neck. My warriors are likely searching the canyons to the north. Even with the whistle, help would not arrive in time. Then we fight, Maria said simply. Something shifted in Dakota's expression, pride perhaps or resolution. He touched her cheek briefly, the gesture so unexpected it stole her breath. Together, he agreed, a flaming arrow arced through the twilight, landing on the cabin's roof with a soft thud. A second followed, then a third. "Fire!" Maria gasped, already moving for the water bucket. Takoda caught her arm. "No, they want us distracted, separated. The roof is damp from yesterday's rain. It will smolder, but not catch quickly." A shot rang out, splintering the window frame inches from Maria's head. She ducked instinctively, pulse roaring in her ears. "They're getting bolder," Takoda observed, voice deadly calm. He had transformed before her eyes, no longer the recovering patient, but the legendary warrior who had become the most feared Apache in the territory. Maria gripped her father's rifle, feeling the weight of past and future converge in this moment. 3 years ago, she had been absent when killers came for her father. Tonight, she would face them with the Alpha Apache at her side. "For my father," she whispered, raising the rifle to her shoulder as the outlaws began a coordinated approach toward the cabin. Takoda nodded in understanding. "For peace," he added quietly, the words an oath as the first of many bullets tore through the cabin wall. By lamplight, they studied the worn map of the valley spread across the floor behind the overturned bookcase. Maria had sketched it herself after her father's death, noting every ridge, creek, and trail within 10 miles of the cabin, a precaution born of fear that now might save their lives. "They won't rush us immediately," Takoda said, his finger tracing the approach to the cabin. 5 men against a fortified position is poor strategy, even with surprise." Another bullet thudded into the cabin wall, as if contradicting his assessment. The outlaws had maintained sporadic fire for nearly an hour, more to keep them pinned down than to cause real damage. "Mendez is impulsive but not stupid," Maria replied, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "They'll wait for full dark, then try to approach from multiple sides." Takoda nodded, studying her with new appreciation. "You think like a warrior." "I think like someone who has imagined this moment for 3 years, she corrected, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "Since they killed my father." The lamp flickered as another shot hit the cabin, closer to the window this time. The smoldering roof had been doused by a brief, providential rainfall, buying them time, but filling the cabin with the acrid smell of wet ash. "2 approaches concern me," Takoda continued, pointing to the map. "The dry creek bed that runs behind the cabin, and this slope to the east where the junipers provide cover." Maria considered this. "The creek bed is exposed for 20 yards before reaching the cabin. But the juniper slope—" She bit her lip. "My father built a cellar door on the east side. It's concealed by brush, but if they find it, then we prepare for that possibility," Takoda finished. He examined the crude floor plan Maria had added to the corner of the map. "The root cellar connects to the main room?" "Yes, a trapdoor beneath the rug." Maria traced the path with her finger, their hands nearly touching on the worn paper. "If they enter through the cellar door, they'll emerge here beside the fireplace." Takoda sat back on his heels, eyes narrowed in thought. For a moment, the fearsome Alpha Apache was fully present in her small cabin, the tactician who had eluded army patrols and protected his people's territory against impossible odds. "We need to divide them," he said finally. "Make them believe I have left and you remain alone." "They won't believe that," Maria objected. "They've surrounded the cabin." "Not entirely." Takoda tapped a section of the map, the steep ravine that ran north of the property. "No one watches this approach. It's too difficult to navigate in darkness, unless you know every rock and root," Maria whispered, understanding dawning. "As I do." "You could slip away," Takoda suggested, though his tone made clear he knew her answer before she gave it. "This is my home," Maria replied firmly. "And Mendez killed my father. I will not run." Something like respect flickered in Takoda's eyes. "Then we give them what they expect. Conflict between us that they can hear." The plan took shape quickly after that. Raised voices, a staged argument in 2 languages. The sound of something heavy falling, a door slamming. Takoda would make his way to the roof through the small attic access. appearing to escape while actually gaining the high ground. When they rush the cabin, believing you're alone, he explained. I will drop behind them, and I'll be waiting with this, Maria added. Patting the rifle, the outlaws had gone temporarily quiet, no doubt planning their own approach. In the brief silence, Maria became acutely aware of how close she and Takoda sat. Heads bent together over the map, united by common purpose and growing trust. If we survive until dawn, she said quietly, my mother will never forgive me for this alliance. And if my people learn I fought alongside a settler, Takoda left the thought unfinished. Then we have nothing to lose, Maria concluded, a strange calm settling over her despite the danger. Takoda's hand covered hers briefly on the map, or everything to gain. The moment stretched between them, taut with possibilities neither dared name. Then a voice called from outside, breaking the spell. Hey, in there! We got all night, lady. Mendez again, his words slightly slurred now. Might as well send out the Apache and save yourself. Maria rose to her knees, gathering the map. It's time. Takoda nodded, already moving toward the small ladder that led to the attic space. At the base, he paused, looking back at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Whatever happens, he said quietly, and know that I would have returned to you. Before Maria could respond, he was climbing upward, disappearing into the shadows of the rafters. She folded the map carefully, her hands steady despite the thundering of her heart. Outside, the outlaws were growing restless, occasional shots punctuating their crude taunts. Inside, Maria moved purposefully, positioning herself for the deception they had planned. I won't help you escape, she shouted suddenly in Spanish, loud enough to be heard outside. They will kill me! They will kill you anyway. Takoda responded in English from the attic, his voice carrying the perfect note of desperate anger. As their staged argument escalated, Maria caught sight of the map, where she had tucked it beneath a loose floorboard. The valley rendered in careful lines, the cabin a tiny square at its heart, a record of the land that had shaped her life, the home she now fought to defend, and the unexpected alliance that had redrawn the boundaries of her world. The hunting knife gleamed dully in the moonlight that filtered through bullet holes in the cabin wall. It had been her father's, then briefly Takoda's during his recovery, and now it rested in Maria's palm, a weapon passed between worlds, connecting past and present in cold steel. Come out, witch woman! Mendez's voice taunted from the darkness. Their staged argument had worked too well. The outlaws now believed Takoda had escaped through the attic, leaving Maria alone and vulnerable. She crouched by the overturned table, listening to the men positioning themselves around the cabin. Their earlier sporadic gunfire had ceased. They were preparing to enter. On the roof above, silent as a shadow, Takoda waited for the moment to spring their trap. A memory flashed unbidden through Maria's mind. Her father on the last morning she saw him alive, sharpening this same knife before riding out to check the fences. Always be ready, Mijita, he had told her. The world doesn't forgive the unprepared. The sound of breaking glass snapped her back to the present. A bottle crashed through the window, flames erupting as the whiskey-soaked rag ignited on impact. Maria moved quickly, smothering the makeshift firebomb with a wet blanket she had prepared for this purpose. Damn it, boys, we need her alive to tell us where the Apache went. A deep voice growled. Not Mendez, someone older. Wolcott wants answers. She chose her side, Mendez argued. Just like her father. The words froze Maria's blood. What had her father known? What connection had Manuel Vasquez had to the schemes now unfolding in the valley? No time to wonder. A shadow passed by the shattered window, someone approaching the east side of the cabin where the concealed cellar door lay. Maria backed toward the fireplace, positioning herself where she could see both the window and the trapdoor. The knife felt alive in her hand, an extension of her will. She had never killed a man, had devoted her life to healing. Now she prepared to do what was necessary, understanding finally the terrible choices her father must have faced. A creak from outside, the cellar door being discovered. Maria steadied her breathing, remembering Takoda's instructions. Let them think they have the advantage. Wait until they are committed to their approach. She had asked him how many men he had killed during their brief discussion of tactics. His answer had been simple, enough to know it changes nothing, heals nothing. But sometimes it is necessary. The trapdoor shifted slightly, someone testing it from below. Maria tightened her grip on the knife, her father's rifle propped against the wall within reach. Across the room, the front door shuddered under a heavy impact. They were trying to break in from multiple directions. Another memory surfaced. Takoda sitting at her table, examining this same knife days ago, his fingers tracing the blade with respect. A good knife tells you about its owner, he had said. This one was well used but never abused. A tool, not just a weapon. The trapdoor began to rise. Maria's world narrowed to this moment, this breath, this heartbeat. Outside, someone shouted, the first sign that Takoda had begun his part of their plan. Confusion in the outlaws' ranks, a cry of alarm. The trapdoor flung fully open. A man emerged, pistol first, eyes wild in the darkness. Not Mendez, one of his companions, younger, less certain. His gaze found Maria widened in surprise at finding her ready, not cowering. She's here. He called over his shoulder. Armed. Maria raised the knife, her voice steady. Leave my home. The man laughed, confidence returning. Or what, Mexican? You'll throw that pig sticker at me? He leveled his pistol. Where's the Apache? A thud on the roof above made the intruder glance upward, the fatal error. Maria moved with surprising speed, her body remembering the knife-fighting lessons her father had insisted upon. A woman alone must know how to defend herself, he had said, teaching her where to strike. How to move. The outlaw's cry of pain was cut short as the knife found its mark in his shoulder, not a killing blow, but enough to send him staggering backward, his shot going wild. He tumbled back through the trapdoor, cursing. Maria snatched up the rifle, knowing their element of surprise was vanishing rapidly. Outside, gunfire erupted. Takoda engaged with the remaining men. The front door splintered under another powerful kick. Time slowed. Maria saw her father's final morning again. His smile, his weathered hands on this same rifle, this same knife at his belt. She understood now what he had faced, why he had ridden out knowing danger waited. Some things were worth fighting for, worth dying for. The door gave way with a crash. Mendez stood framed in the doorway, scarred face twisted in a triumphant sneer, pistol raised. Your Apache friend is about to die on your roof, he growled. And then you're going to tell us everything, Bruja. A shot rang out, but not from Mendez's gun. He staggered, clutching his side, turning in shock toward the window where Takoda now appeared, smoke curling from the barrel of a stolen pistol. In the confusion, Maria raised her father's rifle and fired. The knife lay forgotten on the floor as chaos erupted. Mendez diving for cover, his remaining men shouting in alarm, Takoda vaulting through the window with lethal grace. For a blinding moment, past and present merged in Maria's mind. Her father's last stand superimposed over her own desperate fight. But unlike her father, she was not alone. Together, Takoda said, suddenly beside her, his hand briefly covering hers on the rifle barrel. A promise, a pact, sealed in the heart of battle. In the momentary quiet between gunfire, Maria pulled her journal from its hiding place beneath a loose floorboard. The leather-bound book was scorched along one edge where a stray bullet had struck too close. Like everything else in her world tonight, it had not escaped the violence unscathed. They're regrouping, Takoda said, his voice low as he reloaded the pistol he'd taken from one of Mendez's men. 2 of the outlaws were down, one dead from Takoda's shot from the roof, another wounded and dragged away by his companions. Mendez himself had retreated, cursing after Maria's bullet had grazed his shoulder. The scarred man's parting words still hung in the air. Wolcott's coming at dawn. Then you'll both wish you died tonight. Maria held the journal close, feeling its familiar weight against her chest. What happens when Wolcott arrives? Takoda moved to the window, checking the darkness for movement. Blood streaked his arm where a bullet had creased his skin, but he had refused to let her tend it. until they were certain of a true lull in the fighting. If he brings more men, Dakota answered honestly. We will not be able to hold the cabin, Maria nodded, having already reached the same conclusion. They had fought well together, moving in silent coordination as if they'd trained for years rather than planned for hours. But the odds were overwhelming, and dawn was approaching, the eastern sky already showing the first hint of grey. I need to show you something, she said, opening the journal to its middle pages. If we don't survive this, someone should know. Dakota joined her where she sat on the floor, their backs against the overturned table that now served as their barricade. The intimacy of the moment, shoulders touching, heads bent together over the small book, struck Maria as strangely peaceful amidst the destruction around them. I began writing after they killed my father, she explained, turning weathered pages filled with her careful script. At first it was just grief. But then I started recording things I heard in town, rumors about land deals, strange men meeting at the saloon. Dakota studied the journal entries, his expression intensifying as he recognized names, dates, patterns. You were tracking them, he said. Not a question, but a realization. Not consciously, not at first. Maria turned to an entry from 6 months ago. Here, the first time I heard Wolcott's name. A man in town said he represented Eastern interests, looking to build a railroad spur through the valley. The railroad would require land, Dakota observed. Land currently occupied by settlers like me. Maria confirmed, and Apache hunting grounds to the north. She turned another page. And here, rumors of silver deposits in the foothills. Not rich enough to justify a major operation, but valuable to anyone who could acquire the land cheaply. Dakota's fingers traced the careful map she had drawn on one page. Locations of attacks blamed on Apache, homesteads abandoned, properties suddenly changing hands. You discovered their plan, he said quietly. Parts of it, enough to understand that someone was systematically driving people away, creating fear, tension. She closed the journal, holding it tight. I think my father knew something. The day he died, he told my mother he was going to speak with the army commander about troubles in the valley. Understanding dawned in Dakota's eyes. Like I was attempting to do when I was ambushed. Yes, the weight of this connection settled between them. They killed him to prevent it, just as they tried to kill you. Outside, a coyote called, a sound so normal it seemed surreal after hours of gunfire and shouting. The brief respite wouldn't last. Soon, Mendez and his remaining men would try again, or Wolcott would arrive with reinforcements. If we don't survive, Maria said, voicing the thought that had been growing since the attack began. No one will know the truth. Dakota's hand covered hers on the journal, warm and steady. We will survive. How can you be so certain? Because I have found something I thought lost forever, he replied, his voice low and intense. Peace, understanding. He paused, eyes holding hers in the dim light. You, the confession hung in the air between them, impossible and inevitable. In another life, they would have passed each other with fear and suspicion, the Mexican healer, the Apache warrior. Instead, wounds and chance had brought them together, revealing shared values beneath surface differences. I don't even know what would be possible, Maria whispered, giving voice to the question that had hovered unspoken during their days together. Your people, my community, I know only that I would try to find a way, Dakota answered simply. If you wanted it also. The journal pressed between their hands, Maria's record of truth in a valley built on lies. Whatever happened when dawn broke, this moment existed, a Mexican widow's daughter and the Alpha Apache, choosing each other against all reason. A shot shattered the window, sending glass spraying across the floor. The brief peace evaporated as quickly as morning dew under a harsh sun. They're coming again, Dakota said. Already moving back to his position, Maria tucked the journal inside her dress, close to her heart. Later there would be time for what had been confessed between them, if they lived. Now they had to fight. She retrieved her father's rifle, checking the ammunition with steady hands. Whatever happened, she would face it with the truth documented, and her heart finally awakened after years of dormancy. "Takoda," she called softly as he positioned himself by the broken door. He turned. His warrior's face softened briefly. By what passed between them, I would try to find a way. "Two," she said simply. His nod was all the acknowledgement they had time for as the outlaw's shout signaled the beginning of another attack. The first light of dawn revealed Takoda holding his medicine shield, its painted surface still bright despite years of use in battle. He had retrieved it from his hidden cache near the well during the brief lull in fighting, the shield's presence transforming him from wounded fugitive to warrior chief. "My father made this when I became a man," he told Maria as they watched the eastern sky lighten. "The bear represents strength, the lightning speed. The circle our connection to all living things." Maria touched the shield's edge reverently. After the night's violence, this moment of shared culture felt like a prayer. "It's beautiful. It has turned many bullets," Takoda said, his voice betraying neither pride nor fear. "Today, we will see if its medicine remains strong." The attack had paused as night gave way to morning, but both knew it was merely the calm before the final storm. Mendez and his two remaining men had withdrawn to the edge of the property, clearly waiting for reinforcements. Through the broken window, Maria could see them conferring near the tree line, occasionally glancing toward the road. "Wolcott," she said grimly. Takoda nodded, securing the shield to his arm with practiced movements. "When he comes, they will make their final push." The cabin bore the scars of night-long battle, shattered windows, splintered door, bullet holes peppering the walls. They had held off the outlaws through strategy and determination, but exhaustion tugged at Maria's limbs, and their ammunition was dangerously low. "I should use the whistle," Takoda said suddenly, his eyes on the bone instrument still hanging around Maria's neck. "My warriors may be close enough to hear by now." Hope flared briefly in Maria's chest before reality tempered it. Even if they heard, would they arrive in time? Before Takoda could answer, the distant sound of approaching horses drew their attention. Not from the road as expected, but from the north trail, the direction of town. "More men," Maria whispered, dread settling in her stomach. Takoda moved to the window, shield raised protectively as he peered out. His body tensed, then relaxed slightly. Not Wolcott. Riders from town, the marshal, others. Maria joined him at the window. Indeed, Marshal Dawson led a group of 5 or 6 men toward the cabin at a gallop. Behind them, incredibly, was her mother's wagon. "What is this?" Takoda murmured, confusion evident in his voice. The marshal's party drew to a halt a safe distance from the cabin, well away from Mendez and his men, who had ducked deeper into the trees at their arrival. Maria could see her mother on the wagon seat, her face pale even from this distance. "Miss Vasquez," Marshal Dawson called. "You alive in there?" "Yes," Maria shouted back, keeping away from the window. "Mendez and his men attacked during the night." A murmur ran through the marshal's group. "Mendez!" the lawman repeated. "The one from the old Vasquez murder?" "The same," Maria confirmed. "They work for Wolcott now." The name caused another stir among the townsmen. Marshal Dawson conferred briefly with the others before calling out again. "Is the Apache still with you?" Maria glanced at Takoda, who nodded once, shield still ready. "Yes, he fought to protect me." A tense silence followed this admission. Maria could see the marshal struggling with this information, his hand hovering near his pistol. "Elena Vasquez has something to tell you," he finally said. Gesturing Maria's mother forward, Elena approached slowly. Her usual proud posture diminished by what appeared to be shame. "Maria," she called, voice cracking. "I was wrong. The shopkeeper's son, Thomas, he told me Wolcott's men were looking for you, that they knew about—" She gestured vaguely toward the cabin, unable to directly acknowledge Takoda. I realized what I had done by speaking to Mendez. The admission stunned Maria, her mother coming to warn her. The same woman who had walked out rather than share a roof with an Apache. "Wolcott's been buying up claims all through the valley," the marshal added. "Using threats, creating trouble. Your mother brought his latest scheme to my attention, blaming Apache for attacks his men carried out. Takoda lowered his shield slightly, eyes narrowed in calculation. The truth emerges, he said quietly to Maria. A movement at the tree line caught Maria's attention, Mendez and his men mounting their horses. They had clearly decided the arrival of the marshal made their position untenable, but rather than fleeing, they were riding toward the north road, toward the approaching dust cloud that signaled Wolcott's arrival. "Marshal!" Maria called out in warning. "Reinforcements coming!" The lawman and his men turned, hands moving to weapons as they spotted the distant riders. "How many?" Dawson demanded. "Unknown." Takoda answered before Maria could speak, his deep voice carrying across the yard. "But they come prepared for war." A moment of decision hung in the air. Would the marshal and townsmen flee, leaving Maria and Takoda to their fate? But Marshal Dawson merely repositioned his men, creating a defensive line between the cabin and the approaching threat. "Elena, get inside with your daughter," he ordered. Maria's mother hurried toward the cabin, fear and determination warring on her face. As she reached the door, her eyes met Takoda's for the first time, the Apache warrior with his painted shield standing in her home. Something unspoken passed between them before Elena turned to embrace her daughter. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Before Maria could respond, the bone whistle at her throat suddenly seemed to pulse with urgency. She looked at Takoda, who had gone completely still, his head tilted as if listening to something beyond human hearing. "Now," he said simply, nodding toward the whistle, understanding instantly. Maria raised the bone instrument to her lips and blew 3 sharp blasts, the call Takoda had taught her, the signal that would summon his warriors if they were near enough to hear. The sound pierced the dawn air like a prayer. Takoda lifted his medicine shield toward the rising sun, its painted symbols catching the first golden rays of morning. "My people come," he said with quiet certainty. And in that moment, with her mother beside her and the marshal's men forming a line of defense before the cabin, Maria believed him. The white feather drifted on the morning breeze, landing gently on the blood-stained earth before the cabin. It had fallen from the headdress of one of Takoda's warriors, a small, almost insignificant thing amid the aftermath of battle. Yet Maria found her eyes drawn to it repeatedly as the chaos around her slowly resolved into order. Wolcott was dead. His plans for the valley had died with him when Takoda's warriors emerged from the northern ridge like spirits materializing from mist, answering the call of the bone whistle with devastating precision. Caught between the Apache force and Marshal Dawson's men, Wolcott's hired guns had scattered, leaving their employer to face justice from both worlds he had wronged. Maria stood on the porch now, watching the strange assembly on her property, Apache warriors and townsfolk keeping wary distance from each other, united only by their common victory over a greater enemy. At the center of it all stood Takoda and Marshal Dawson, speaking in low voices as they negotiated this fragile peace. "I never thought I'd see the day," Eleanor murmured beside her. Maria's mother had aged years in a single night, her proud posture diminished by exhaustion and the weight of her misjudgments. "Which day?" Maria asked, her own voice rough from smoke and shouting. "The day settlers and Apache would fight side by side." Eleanor shook her head slowly. "Your father believed it possible. I called him a fool." Maria watched as Takoda gestured toward the mountains, explaining something to the marshal. The Alpha Apache was transformed in victory, not diminished or softened, but somehow more complete, his warrior aspect balanced by the diplomat she now knew him to be. "Papa wasn't a fool," she said quietly. "He saw beyond fear." Eleanor's fingers twisted in her apron. "Mendez confessed before he died. Wolcott paid them to kill your father because he was gathering evidence of false attacks, trying to prove Apache weren't responsible." Her voice broke slightly. "I blamed the wrong people all these years." The white feather caught another breeze, tumbling closer to the porch steps. Maria descended and retrieved it, its softness a stark contrast to the hard violence that had preceded this moment. "What happens now?" Elena asked, watching as her daughter carefully tucked the feather into her pocket. Before Maria could answer, Takoda approached, his medicine shield now strapped to his back, his warriors waiting at a respectful distance. The night's fighting had reopened one of his wounds, a dark stain spreading slowly across his buckskin shirt. Yet he moved with the same fluid dignity she had come to know during their time together. "The Marshal has agreed to bring Wolcott's remaining men to justice," he said without preamble, "and to present evidence to the army that the raids were falsely blamed on my people." "That's good," Maria replied, acutely aware of her mother's presence, of the barriers still standing between their worlds, despite the morning's unlikely alliance. "My warriors will return to our camp in the high country," Takoda continued, his eyes never leaving hers despite addressing them both. "I must go with them, of course he must. He was their chief, their leader." The sudden hollowness in Maria's chest surprised her with its intensity, though she had always known this moment would come. "Your people need you," she acknowledged, keeping her voice steady. Something softened in his expression. "Yes, but there is more." He glanced at Elena, including her in what he would say next. "The army commander at Fort Garland still expects a peace delegation. I intend to complete my mission, to negotiate terms that will allow both our peoples to live without fear." Elena stiffened beside Maria. "The army has broken promises before." "As have my people," Takoda admitted. "But we must begin somewhere, or blood will continue to flow." He looked back to Maria. "I will tell them of a Mexican healer who saved the life of the Alpha Apache, of settlers who fought alongside warriors against a common enemy." Maria understood what he was saying. Their unlikely bond could be the first thread in a new pattern, a story to counter generations of fear and mistrust. "When will you go?" she asked, the white feather a small weight in her pocket. "Today. Now." His directness was unchanged by all they had shared. "My people need reassurance after believing me dead these many days." She nodded, disappointment and pride warring within her. This was who he was, direct, dutiful, a leader of his people. The same qualities that had drawn her to him now took him away. Elena surprised them both by speaking. "You will be welcome to return," she said stiffly, the words clearly difficult but sincere, "to discuss the future of the valley." Takoda regarded Elena with new respect, understanding the significant concession her invitation represented. "I will return," he said simply. Then his eyes meeting Maria's once more, "in 7 days." A promise, not a goodbye. Maria felt something unfurl in her chest, fragile as the white feather, but surprisingly resilient. "We will be here," she replied. As Takoda rejoined his warriors, the white feather seemed to warm in Maria's pocket, a small token of peace amid the wreckage of conflict, a beginning rather than an end. The new cabin door stood half-finished, its raw pine boards a stark contrast to the weathered walls around it. Maria ran her hand along the smooth, planed edge, the scent of fresh-cut wood mingling with the lingering smell of gun smoke that even 3 days of cleaning hadn't fully erased. "Thomas and his father brought it yesterday," Elena explained, watching her daughter from the table where she sorted through salvaged dishes. "No charge. Said it was the least they could do." Maria nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The valley had transformed in the days since the battle. Or perhaps it was she who had changed, seeing clearly what had always been beneath the surface. Neighbors who had once whispered witch now brought food and building materials. The marshal rode by daily, updating them on the arrests of Wolcott's remaining men, and in 4 days Takoda would return. "What will you do when he comes?" Elena asked, giving voice to the question that had hovered between them since he'd departed with his warriors. Maria turned from the door, meeting her mother's gaze directly. "I don't know, it was honest at least." The connection between her and the Apache chief defied simple categorization. In the crucible of danger, they had formed a bond that transcended their different worlds. But what shape could that bond take in the light of ordinary days? "He cannot stay here," Eleanor said, her tone gentler than her words. "His people need him, I know, and you cannot go with him to live among the Apache." This was less certain. Maria had considered it in the quiet hours before dawn, imagining a life in the high country, learning new ways of healing, of living. But the thought of leaving her mother, her home, the garden that had sustained her through grief, it created a hollow ache beneath her ribs. "I don't know what's possible," Maria admitted, returning to her work on the door. The rhythmic motion of sanding the wood soothed her troubled thoughts. "Perhaps nothing beyond what has already happened." Elena rose from the table, coming to stand beside her daughter. Age and hardship had carved deep lines around her eyes. Yet there was a new softness there that reminded Maria of the mother she'd known before tragedy hardened them both. "When your father first brought me here from Mexico, everyone said it was impossible," Elena said quietly. "A Mexican woman marrying a half-American rancher, living on disputed land? They gave us one winter before we'd flee back to Sonora." A faint smile touched her lips. "We had 20 good years instead." Maria stilled her hands on the door. "This is different." "Yes, more difficult." Eleanor touched the new wood thoughtfully. "But your father believed in impossible things. Perhaps that is your inheritance from him. Not just this land, but the courage to build doors where others see only walls." The unexpected wisdom from her mother, who had been the voice of caution and convention all Maria's life, left her momentarily. "Speechless, I judged him," Elena continued, regret shading her voice. "I was wrong. About many things." She hesitated, then added, "The Apache chief, Takoda, he fights for his people as your father fought for his family." "Yes," Maria agreed, her heart swelling with unexpected hope at her mother's recognition of Takoda's true nature. "He is a good man living in a different world," Eleanor corrected gently. "Remember that, Hisha, when he returns." The door frame beneath Maria's hands seemed to represent all the thresholds in her life, those already crossed and those yet to be faced. Whatever choice she made, when Takoda returned, would reshape her future as surely as her father's death had altered her past. "Marshal Dawson says the army is receiving Takoda's peace delegation tomorrow," Maria said, changing the subject slightly. "He believes the commander may accept their terms." "Peace," Elena murmured, the word sounding foreign on her tongue after so many years of fear. "Your father would be pleased." They worked in companionable silence for a time, Maria fitting the door hinges while Eleanor continued salvaging what could be saved from the battle-damaged cabin. So much had been destroyed, yet Maria found herself focused not on what was lost, but on what might be built in its place. Evening approached, painting the valley in shades of amber and gold. Maria stepped outside to watch the sunset, drawn to the spot where she and Takoda had sat on that night when they'd first shared their stories of loss and healing. From this vantage point, she could see the trails leading in all directions, to town, to the high country where the Apache made their camps, to the fort where decisions about the valley's future were being made. Different paths, different possibilities. Behind her, the half-finished door stood propped in its frame, neither fully open nor fully closed, like her heart, like her future. In 4 days, Takoda would return, and together they would determine what doorways might exist between their separate worlds. For now, Maria was content to watch the sunset paint the valley in light, knowing that whatever choice she made, she would make it standing in her truth. With eyes wide open, the most valuable lesson she had learned from the Alpha Apache who had stumbled wounded into her life and changed it forever. The wedding blanket lay folded across Maria's bed, its intricate pattern of white and indigo threads catching the late afternoon light. Elena had begun weaving it years ago, in anticipation of a marriage between her daughter and Thomas that never came to pass. Now she had completed it, not with the traditional Mexican designs she had originally planned, but with a border incorporating both Apache and Mexican symbols of unity and protection. "It's beautiful." "Mama," Maria said, running her fingers over the tightly woven wool. But why finish it now? Elena smoothed an invisible wrinkle from the fabric. Because it is good to be prepared, whatever happens. Today was the 7th day. Dakota would return as promised or he wouldn't. Either way, Maria had resolved to face the outcome with the same quiet strength that had sustained her through the years since her father's death. The new door, now completed and hanging properly on its hinges, swung open as a breeze swept through the cabin. Elena glanced toward it, a flicker of something, anticipation perhaps, or anxiety crossing her face. "I will gather herbs from the garden," she announced, clearly manufacturing a reason to give Maria privacy. "The chamomile is ready for harvesting." Alone in the cabin, Maria touched the wedding blanket once more before moving to the window that faced north, the direction from which Dakota would come, if he came at all. The valley stretched peaceful before her, wildflowers nodding in the summer breeze, so different from the scene of violence that had played out a week earlier. News had reached them yesterday. The Army commander at Fort Garland had signed preliminary agreements with the Apache delegation. The terms included designated hunting grounds, restrictions on new settlements, and joint patrols to prevent the kind of false flag attacks Wolcott had orchestrated. Peace, fragile and untested, but peace nonetheless. Marshal Dawson had delivered the news himself, along with a more personal message. The Alpha Apache led the negotiations. Impressive man. Said to tell you he keeps his promises. A dust cloud on the northern trail drew Maria's attention, her heart accelerating despite her determination to remain composed. A single rider approached, the distinctive silhouette unmistakable even at a distance. Dakota. Maria stepped outside onto the porch, shading her eyes against the late afternoon sun. Behind her in the garden, Elena straightened, following her daughter's gaze to the approaching rider. "He came," Elena said softly, something like respect in her voice. "Yes?" Maria smoothed her skirt, suddenly self-conscious. She had worn her best dress today, the deep blue one reserved for fiestas and special occasions. Though she had told herself it was merely coincidence, Dakota drew closer, close enough now that she could see changes in him. He rode straighter, his bearing that of a chief secure in his authority rather than a wounded fugitive. He wore a finely worked buckskin shirt she hadn't seen before, and his hair was adorned with a single feather, white, like the one she had found after the battle. He dismounted a respectful distance from the cabin, leading his horse the remaining way. His eyes found Maria immediately, holding her gaze with the same direct intensity she remembered. "You rebuilt the door," he observed, stopping at the foot of the porch steps. "Yes," Maria couldn't help smiling at this practical opening, so characteristic of him, and much more. Silence stretched between them, filled with all they had experienced together and all the questions that remained unanswered. "I heard about the treaty," Maria said finally. "You succeeded in your mission." "The beginning of success," Dakota corrected. "Words on paper mean little without actions to support them." Eleanor approached from the garden, her basket filled with herbs. She nodded to Dakota, her traditional reserve tempered by new respect. "You're welcome to water your horse at our well." It was a small gesture but significant, an invitation to linger, to be a guest rather than an intruder. Dakota inclined his head in acknowledgement. "Thank you." As Elena disappeared into the cabin with her herbs, Maria descended the steps to stand before Dakota, close enough to see the new lines of fatigue around his eyes. The healing cut along his jawline from the battle. "You kept your promise," she said quietly. "I keep all my promises." His voice was low, meant for her alone, including the one I made to myself when I left here, that I would find a way to bridge our worlds. Hope bloomed in Maria's chest, fragile but insistent. "What way?" Dakota gestured toward the valley around them. "The treaty establishes a neutral territory here, along the river. Land where both Apache and settler may live, trade, learn from each other." His eyes held hers steadily. "I have been chosen to represent my people in this place. You would stay in the valley?" Maria hardly dared believe what she was hearing. Not in the town, he clarified. My people would not understand, nor would many settlers. But here, at this boundary between worlds, he left the thought unfinished, allowing Maria to grasp its implications. Through the open door, Maria could see the wedding blanket on her bed, its dual patterns of Apache and Mexican design catching the sunlight. Not an ending or a beginning, but a continuation, a weaving together of separate threads into something new and strong. There will be difficulties, she said, practical despite the joy rising within her. Yes, Dakota agreed. Many. And your people? Will they accept such an arrangement? Some will. Others must learn. His hand reached for hers, fingers intertwining with quiet certainty, as must yours. The touch of his skin against hers felt like coming home, to a home she hadn't known, existed until a wounded warrior collapsed beside her well and changed. Everything. Then we will teach them, Maria said, her voice steady with newfound purpose. Together, the cradle rocked gently beneath Maria's hand, its curved wooden form bearing carvings that told two stories. On one side, Apache symbols of protection and strength flowed across the dark wood. On the other, roses and vines in the Mexican style spiraled upward. Dakota had carved it himself during the long winter evenings, his skilled hands creating a legacy for the child who would soon enter their world. She's kicking again, Maria murmured, her other hand resting on the swell of her belly. Strong, like her father. Dakota looked up from the herbs he was sorting at the table, another evening ritual they had developed in the year since their unconventional union. Or wise like her mother, he countered, the hint of a smile softening his serious face. Outside, spring was returning to the valley. The neutral territory established by the treaty had flourished beyond anyone's expectations. What had begun as an experiment, a buffer zone between Apache lands and settler communities, had become something more, a place of exchange, of learning, of cautious but genuine cooperation. Their home stood at its center, not Maria's original cabin, which held too many violent memories, but a new structure built a half-mile away, near the bend in the river. It combined elements of both their traditions, the solid log construction favored by settlers and the circular central space of Apache design. Like the cradle, like their life together, it was neither one thing nor the other. But something new. Elena appeared in the doorway, returning from her visit to the small Apache settlement that had formed nearby. Windwolf's youngest has the fever again, she reported, setting down her basket of remedies. I left willow bark tea and instructions, Maria nodded, unsurprised by her mother's easy mention of the Apache family. Elena had undergone perhaps the most remarkable transformation of all, from fearful widow to respected elder who moved between cultures with increasing confidence. The healing skills she had once discouraged in her daughter, she now studied herself, combining them with the traditional Mexican remedies of her youth. Marshal Dawson brought news from town, Elena continued, warming her hands at the fire. The railroad surveyors have confirmed they'll honor the treaty boundaries. No tracks through the neutral territory. Dakota nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. This had been a point of concern, whether the agreements made would hold when tested by progress and profit. So far, remarkably, they had. The discovery of richer silver deposits to the south had helped, diverting attention from their valley. Sometimes peace had as much to do with luck as with human effort, and Thomas sends word that the supply wagons will arrive tomorrow, Elena finished. Including the medicines you requested, Maria. Maria smiled her thanks, remembering the awkward conversation with her former fiancé last autumn. Thomas had been hesitant, uncertain how to address the woman who had once rejected him, and now lived openly with the Apache chief. But Thomas had provided neutral ground, and gradually a working relationship had developed. Now he served as a vital link between their community and the town, navigating both worlds, much as they did. The cradle rocked again beneath Maria's hand, a smooth, soothing motion. Inside her their daughter shifted, a child of two bloodlines who would know neither the bitter isolation of her mother's past nor the embattled vigilance of her father's. Instead, she would grow in this new place they had helped create, carrying forward the legacy of both peoples. "What are you thinking?" Takoda asked, moving to sit beside Maria, his hand joining hers on the cradle's polished edge. "About my father," she answered honestly. "About how he tried to build bridges when others wanted walls. How he died for it." She looked up at Takoda, at the face that had become as familiar to her as her own. "And about how his dream lives in a way he couldn't have imagined." Takoda nodded, understanding as he always did the currents that ran beneath her words. "In the traditions of my people, we believe our ancestors watch over us, guiding our paths when we have the wisdom to listen. My grandmother believed the same," Maria said, thinking of the old woman who had taught her to heal, to see beyond surface differences to the human needs beneath. "Perhaps they are together now, your ancestors and mine, watching what we've built here." "A good thought," Takoda agreed. He placed his hand on her belly, feeling their daughter's movements. "We will tell her these stories, of your father's courage, of the battle for this valley, of how peace grew from conflict, and of a wounded Apache chief who found his way to a healer's door," Maria added softly, "who changed everything by choosing to trust." Outside, the last light of day painted the valley in gold, illuminating the small cluster of homes that had formed around theirs, some in the Apache style, others built by settlers who valued the new cooperation. Children played together in the communal space, their voices rising in a blend of languages. Gardens flourished beside traditional medicinal plots, different ways of living, gradually learning from each other. It wasn't perfect. Tension still arose, misunderstandings occurred, old fears resurfaced. But each day brought new possibilities, new connections. The child within her would be born into this imperfect but hopeful world they had helped create. The cradle rocked beneath their joined hands, awaiting its precious occupant. Like the white feather that still hung beside their door, like the wedding blanket folded carefully in their trunk, it stood as testament to what could grow when healing was chosen over hatred. "When bridges replaced barriers, our daughter will have a good life here," Takoda said, certainty in his voice. "Yes," Maria agreed, leaning against the strength of his shoulder. "She will,